Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 13. I want to begin by wishing everybody a kosher and freilich and Pesach, one that is both liberating, transcendent, and allows us to get out of the mitzarim v'gvulim, Mitzrayim, the limitations, the constraints, the inhibitions, the fears and insecurities, and experience freedom, be able to take flight and access our wings, which was very much the theme of my life, about using Torah and Chassidus to help us discover our deeper and inner strengths and overcome challenges and difficulties as a result of this material world in which we live, our childhood experiences, our lifetime experiences. So, in continuation of last week's discussion about sexual identity, a number of emails and questions, and I want to address a second part of this discussion which I did not really address fully in the previous episode, and that is what approach to take, whether you or someone you know, a family member, a friend, a colleague, is in this situation where they're challenged with the issue of same-sex attraction and the likes. So I did address the actual topic from a Torah point of view. What is sexuality? Who defines what sexuality is? I read the letter from the Rebbe, and as well as cited some of the Rebbe's words in that talk of Purim, Tavshin Mem Vav, which was 1986. And essentially that all of us have different challenges in our lives, and this is one of them, which means we have the power and the strength to overcome it. And we do not have to succumb to what is called a popular or politically correct attitude that just because everyone is doing it or everybody is saying this is who you are, that's why you have to accept that. The whole Torah was always meant to be a pioneering force that did not necessarily go with the flow. Abraham was called Avram HaIvri because he stood on one side and the rest of the world on the other side. So though some things may not be so politically correct, the Torah tries to teach us what God wants of us, what our mission in this world is about, and how to actualize our souls and our potential. And sometimes that requires also dealing with challenges of this nature. We address that at length. But the question is, what is the approach to take when you know somebody like this or you yourself are in this situation? And this is far more complicated because you're dealing with lives. We're dealing with the sensitivities necessary to address a challenge that is plaguing and affecting so many people. So let's begin with the most important thing, which is really a central theme that I've been addressing in all episodes, and that is the way we speak to each other, the way we communicate with each other. We have to remember that each human being has the dignity and the sacred mission of God having chosen his or her soul to come to this earth. So when you speak to someone, you have to always remember that that person has a beautiful soul that was chosen by God to come to this world and accomplish something that person and no one but that person can accomplish. We all have challenges. So to begin with an attitude of judgmentalism, even by something you may be repulsed by, homophobia, because you see, everybody in this world has flaws. Everybody's got challenges. But there are certain things, especially when it comes to issues around homosexuality and so on, that makes people very uneasy, very uncomfortable. And you have to wonder whether your discomfort is based on because of God or is because of your own discomfort. This is by no means, as I discussed at length, by no means in any way minimizing what the Torah says about this matter, but it does discuss how we are supposed to approach it. The Torah speaks about many things. There are 613 mitzvahs, 248 positive, 365 negative. Nobody's a tzaddik. Even a tzaddik, it says, Ein tzaddik baruch yaseh teva lo yechta. Everyone has at least some type of diminished state compared to how the soul was up in heaven, as the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya. So who are we to judge? So judgment, condescension, cynicism, sarcasm, any type of ostracization is not our job, it's not our role. The Torah teaches us in any situation when you meet someone, or you yourself in a situation when there's a challenge, You have to have ultra sensitivity. Whole chapter in Tanya that talks about to have a don odem l'chav schus, not to judge someone until you're in their shoes, and to recognize that everybody's got their unique challenge. So we should not be in any type of attitude of I am better, or I am judging, or I am determining what's right and what's wrong. Our job is one thing and one thing only, and that is to help each other grow. So when anyone dealing with such a challenge, the most important thing is compassion, sensitivity, and love, and caring. I believe that if there was caring and love and no judgment, it would be far easier to address this issue. The problem is, once you bring judgment into it, once you bring you personalize it, and you turn it into, oh, how disgusting you are, or you turn it into a type of demeaning and demoralization of another person, then it becomes far more difficult to deal with it. And it's two separate things. If you can just look at the issue itself, the challenge itself, that's enough to handle. To include our homophobia or our challenges or our issues just amplifies the problem and makes it far more difficult to address. So those of us, or those of you that are unable to have that type of sensitivity, so maybe this is something you shouldn't be addressing altogether. For those that want to be of help, whether you have a brother or a sister, or you have a friend, or you yourself are dealing with this challenge, you have to find sensitive people. Let's deal with somebody else. You have to be sensitive, and you have to really try to help them understand themselves. And this is not meaning an acceptance necessarily of this type of behavior, but it's like thinking it's my own brother, it's my own sister, it's my own flesh and blood. It's like I have this issue. So it's a matter of being sensitive in addressing it and helping a person find some direction and some guidance. Now, of course, if a person says, listen, I'm openly gay and I refuse to accept that this is a problem, this is who I am, this is who I'm born with, like in all matters, if someone is very adamant in that way, all you can do is be nice, be kind, and maybe there'll be an opening. But not treat it in any way differently than any issue, in any problem. Now, of course, this is a more serious one because it deals with sexuality, it deals with building a family, it deals with the future, it deals with a person's destiny. But you know, people who do things that are self-destructive. We can only try to help as much as we can, and then we have to say, listen, I hope God does the rest. So this isn't about we're not crusaders that have to correct this issue. We have to show the sensitivity and kindness, like in any given situation, of responsibility of helping someone walk them through, maybe have a conversation. Just a few months ago, a fellow in the religious community came to speak to me confidentially. He was having these challenges. I didn't have answers for him, but I said to him, what do you want with your life? What do you want to accomplish in your life? Do you want to build a family like you came from a beautiful family? He said, yes, but I don't see myself ever finding that type of attraction to a woman and building a home and family. And I said to him basically, look, God sent you to this earth. He wants you to build a home and family. And there's no question that if you really want to, you can find ways. And I shared with him episodes and incidents, like the Rebbe wrote in the letter that I read last week, in the last episode, that there are situations where you find people who've had this challenge in a very serious way, absolutely no attraction to the opposite gender. And yet with work and with therapy, they were able to find marriage, be happy, and still may have a challenge. We all have challenges. You walk down the street, you have a machshava zara, you have a negative thought. So what? The question is, what are you going to do about it? Take control of your life. My mission, my objective in speaking with this fellow, and this is my suggestion to all of us, was simply to give him hope, give him strength, empower him. You can do what you want to do. Nothing controls you. And if it's a matter that the Torah speaks about, something, and says something that you don't have to be this way, or it's a sin, or it's an abomination, or God doesn't want you, it means you have the power. My goal was a simple empowerment. I'm not here to fix him. I'm not here to change him. I'm not here to tell him what to do. You want help? Be a supporting friend. Be a supporting voice, a shoulder to lean on, a sympathetic ear that allows people to walk through, and you never know, they start talking about certain things. We all have issues. And this is really no different than any challenge. And I'm not going to start measuring which is a bigger sin or lesser sin. Every challenge has a challenge. The Rebbe once famously said in the Farbrengen, he probably said it more than once, but I remember once the Rebbe saying that everybody has flaws, but don't make a philosophy out of your flaws. That's the key. We all have problems. You start looking at yourself, you may minimize them. Kol negoy adam re'eh, everybody sees all the blemishes, chutz min negoy atzmi, except your own blemishes. You minimize it. We have blind spots. So we all have them. Don't make a philosophy out of them, because then you're not even considering it a problem. Then you say, hey, this is the way it is. That is unacceptable. So the Torah is unequivocal and says, what is healthy sexual behavior, what is not. But now comes the approach, what do you do? This is a whole different story. It's not talking about right and wrong. We're talking about what does someone do who's in that situation, who's either been nichshel, which means they've already fallen, or they have made their mistakes, or they have inclination to do so. So this is like in any given situation, sympathy, love, care is a critical component, which will motivate a person not to feel broken and demoralized. As the Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya, atzvus and depression and demoralization is definitely not going to help the situation. It only makes you weaker and you can't fight the battle. On the contrary, strengthening a person, showing them I'm always there for you. That is the general approach. Obviously, case by case, every individual has their own challenges, and individuals at different ages. It would be healthy if a child who has such inclinations would be able to speak to parents. Often that's not the case. Or find a mentor or find someone to speak to. So if there's anyone out there listening that has these challenges, first of all, I want to welcome and invite, if you'd like to speak to me, as I've given people my personal email address, which is completely confidential, Simon at meaningfullife.com. Feel free to write to me. You want to speak confidential, you want it to be anonymous, you can speak on the phone. I don't need to meet you or know who you are. And I am sure there are others as well that you can reach out to if you want to talk. It's about talking it through, thinking about your life. Remember this is life consequences. For a person who finds it difficult to be able to marry and have children, this is an important thing. This is forever and ever. So it's not a small matter. We should take it very seriously. And I'm talking now to people who may have this challenge. And for those of us that have friends or others, as I said, the sensitivity, speaking, listening, and getting rid of your own judgment, getting rid of your own attitudes and preconceived notions and so on and so forth. Now people ask the question, what about giving people like who consider themselves gay an aliyah in the shul, or honoring them at a dinner, or giving them some other type of respect? Well, frankly, it doesn't say anywhere in the Torah you're not allowed to. If you start judging or looking at people based on their different choices, what about people who don't keep Shabbos, or people who do other things that are considered a crime or a sin? So it's not. This is one matter. I would still say case by case. Some people say, well, if we give a person like this an aliyah, it's a chil Hashem, because in a way we're endorsing it. I don't necessarily see it that way, but if an entire community in a synagogue feels that they don't want to give aliyahs to people who do sins, then they should determine which sins they are allowed, which are not allowed. I say that tongue in cheek, and come up with a consensus. I'm not here to tell synagogues what to do. But if you ask from a Torah point of view, first, people like this need to actually have compassion for them. It's not about ostracizing. Obviously, if they're behaving in a way that is destructive to others, they're trying to promote this type of relationship or this type of behavior, and that you find them being a negative influence, then it's a different story. The negative influence, there's other types of negative influence. There are drug pushers, there are other types of negative influence, and that needs to be judged based on that case by case. I'm just trying to distinguish between Yitamu Chatoyim v'lo Chotim. May the sins be erased, but not the sinners. So we unequivocally defined what the Torah says about this matter, about all matters of healthy sexuality versus unhealthy sexuality, healthy intimacy versus unhealthy intimacy. And then there's the dealing with the gavra. That's the chefza, so to speak. That's the matter itself. And then there's dealing with the individual. And that's a whole other story, dealing with sensitivity, kindness, and so on. There was an individual that years ago behaved in a way that for some reason the Rebbe felt he cannot associate with Chabad. So he traveled to a certain city, and the rabbis there, the Chabad rabbis, asked the Rebbe whether they should have this individual give him a public platform. And the Rebbe said no, because we don't want to endorse him in any way. Later, he asked the head shliach of that particular city, the particular country, he said to him, so what happened with this individual? He says, the Rebbe said we shouldn't have any connection. Did you invite him Friday night for Shabbos? No. The Rebbe said, one thing is a public display where, certain people you endorse, certain people you don't want to. But he's a Jew like every other Jew. Why didn't you invite him for Shabbos? This can be applied overall. And we have to have the wisdom to understand that it's not some type of black and white situation. A person could behave a certain way. It could be something that is really disturbing and inappropriate. And then there's how we address that person. Oyeves habriyas, the Rebbe speaks so often about. Love the briyas. Why does it say Oyeves habriyas in Mishnah and Pirkei Avos? Hillel said, love the creatures, briyas. Because even if it's briyas ba'alma, he brings in Tanya in chapter 32, even if there's no quality, but the fact that he's a creation of God's, which means you can't find any other virtue except that God created him, that's also worthy of love. Now, there is no such person on earth that has no quality except being a creature of God. But even that's the case, meaning everyone has to be loved. And then bekarvon l'teira. Not bring the Torah to him, but bring bekarvon l'teira. Bring him to the Torah. So you see here, and it's not a contradiction. You can say, one second, I'm going to him, I'm loving him, even though he's on that level of only being a creature. So you could think, okay, I'll bring the Torah to him on his level. No. You bring him the love to his level. But then you elevate him to the level that the Torah expects. And that's the effort. Not trying to compromise Torah to accommodate him. You are loving the soul, the godly features in him. The Gemara says, Lech l'uman shasani. There was a person, a very unseemly person, literally an ugly person. And one of the Tanoim said to him, Eich kama mechur. How ugly, how disgusting are you? It's another question, how anyone, a sage, can say that. But the Talmud tells us that. So he responds, this man that was unseemly responds to the Tana, to the sage. He says to him, Lech l'uman shasani. Go to the craftsman that created me, that shaped me. He shaped me and made me like this. Tremendous lesson in life. God creates human beings. God creates us. Even the challenges we have are also part of God's plan. As the Rebbe wrote in the letter that I read, that the challenges themselves are there to bring out deeper strengths that you have. So who are we to judge? How would you be if you had that challenge? What would you do? So we have to always never look at somebody and never, the Mishnah says it, the Alter Rebbe explains it in Tanya, as I mentioned. So the bottom line is that there's a distinction between the behavior and there's a distinction between the person. And the person must be treated with deep respect. That does not mean any endorsement, making it very clear where your position is, but it can be done with kindness and with love, and that gives a person power to deal with the challenges that they have. If you care about what God wants and not what you want, that's what matters. It's not about whether you're turned off or you're disturbed or you're homophobic. It's about what does God want from all of this. Much more can be said about this. And as I said, I invite again anyone who wants to discuss it further privately. Feel free to contact me and or write in your questions at meaningfullife.com/MyLife Live, where there's a forum where you can a form, I should say, where you could write in anonymously, and I'll try to respond to any other questions about this topic. Let's move on to another topic I discussed, Pesach Chumros, being that we're on the threshold of Passover. So I received a letter in response to last episode 12. And I'll read the letter and I'll then respond to that letter. Hi, Rabbi Jacobson. Baruch Hashem, I had a chance last night to watch episode 12 of this remarkable and deep class, which you enter into areas where people are struggling for guidance and direction. Aside from that, I also want to mention how brave you are to go public, and especially in a challenging crowd like Lubavitchers could sometimes be. Sometimes. That's my... During which you came to answer a question regarding a Hidur mitzvah or a Chumrah when it's up against Shalom Bayis, as where you went on to bring some very true and important information based on a story of the Rebbe to bring out your belief that whenever Shalom Bayis might be disturbed because of a Hidur or a Chumrah, it is important to put the Chumrah secondary and nurture the Shalom Bayis. Where regarding this idea, I have a couple of thoughts that I would like to put into writing. So let me read what the thoughts are, continuing. 1. In how it was related to your audience regarding someone who is trying to be more machmir, it kind of sounded like a blanket statement that there is a machmir in halacha, it's only because of his own nature, or as it was called, cultural, or it is just something that got stuck to him from home. The feeling I got was that there wasn't much value given to bring out or just to be sensitive how hard someone might really try to be careful regarding her stringency and sometimes makes real sacrifices, whereas instead this person was made to sound like a selfish and totally out of reach with reality. I feel this person didn't get a rightful judgment. To explain, the person this letter is referring to, the person who's machmir, and I was suggesting Shalom Bayis trumps the chumrah, and this writer is questioning or challenging, you can say, what about the chumrah? Some people actually paid a real price to do a chumrah. Very good question. But let me read on and then I'll respond. Number 2, regarding the story of the Rebbe, I would like to make a couple of comments. A, the answer that the Rebbe gave, and I'm referring to the answer the Rebbe gave about Shalom Bayis being more important than the religion, so to speak, meaning that Shalom Bayis is the deepest religious experience because it's more important in God's plan. Erase my name in order to preserve peace between husband and wife. So the fellow was writing here, the answer that the Rebbe gave was in private, without the spouse present, where I can imagine for many reasons. Firstly, not to cause embarrassment. Also, perhaps this was something where the Rebbe understood that situation. And furthermore, if for whatever reason the husband in this situation would continue his behavior, or just in all disregard the advice the Rebbe gave him, now for the rest of his life, all that he would hear from his wife, I can only imagine she will become the big chassid, the Rebbe and Neira Shabbos. The Rebbe said, Neira Shabbos. Okay, so B, the Rebbe didn't answer what necessarily the one asking was wishing to hear. Now let's take a step back to MyLife. When receiving anonymous emails, we don't know who is asking and why. We also don't know who is sitting there while we are answering these questions. I can only imagine if there were any couple struggling with this issue sitting there, one could just turn to the other and say, you see, I told you to leave go. Rabbi Jacobson just affirmed that I believe about you, what I believe about you, that you are a selfish fool. And even if they didn't say this directly, and they only thought it, I still believe, why not try to have the spouse which is struggling with chumras, maybe try to appreciate it a bit more, and perhaps and also bring out more how special a hiddur mitzvah is, similar to the story and how the Rebbe's approach. Possibly the spouse which is struggling just doesn't understand what a hiddur is. And the Mahadir doesn't have the right words. And who knows, maybe the Shalom Bayis can even be strengthened by Torah mitzvahs behiddur instead of the opposite. B, the one asking was the one struggling with the chumras, not like in the story. That is why the story you mentioned is a great one to bring out how careful you need to be about people's feelings and not to escalate the tension. In this situation, the trick is not by siding with the questioner, but rather explain to the one asking how they can make a difference and to be more caring, more like how you did in the second and concluding part of the session. I hope you received this email with the same attitude in which is being sent, which is with a lot of care. Thank you for your dedication to everything that you do. Wishing you a kosher and freilich and Pesach, with the blessings of not only leaving our spiritual exile, but we shall leave the galus kipshute with his galus of the Rebbe. Okay, very good points. Thank you for the blessings as well. May you be blessed. May everyone be blessed. So let me continue where I left off. The point I was making was true. It sounded like a blanket statement, but the Rambam does make a blanket statement. He says the whole Torah was given to bring peace in the world. And to focus often on religion and person's individual chumras is more about you and not necessarily about God. However, the questioner makes a very good point. There are people who really authentically and sincerely, not due to culture and not due to programming, have paid a heavy price for a certain chumrah. So let's address this in real time. Meaning, husband and wife have a conflict. The wife feels that the husband is imposing on her, just for an example, certain chumras Pesach, making her clean more, making her work harder. And she's resentful. And she sees that it's his preference. She sees her friends and others don't necessarily have that type of chumrah. And it creates tension between the two. What do you do? So she can defer to the husband out of love and say, you know what, I respect his chumras. He can defer to her and just say, you know what, why don't you do it your way? So if there's a tension that cannot be resolved, let's say they have the argument, they sit down. Obviously, it has to be addressed case by case. But let's, for argument's sake, they cannot resolve it. So I was pointing out that Shalom Bayis is first, which means what? The husband should consider the chumrah. And you know something? Maybe he should work a little harder. If he really thinks this chumrah is important, let him show love to his wife by saying, you're right, honey. I'm not going to force you to do this. I'm going to clean extra. I'm going to prepare something the way I think it should be prepared in Chumrah. To impose on her and just say, it's my religion, my Chumrah, may smack of something very selfish, and it's all about him. She doesn't necessarily see him doing this because he's godly. She's seeing it, he wants it, it's his preference. If it's taka a Chumrah that's divine, that's what the Rebbe told that person, a person should honor his wife more than himself. Which means, if you really feel it's an important Chumrah, do something and show her how much you love her, and don't just impose it. At the same time, of course, if they have a serious conversation and communication, of course, if there's real love and there's real friendship and there's real kindness, she may respect, if it's presented the right way and not just with a stick over her head, respect why he wants this Chumrah. Maybe he needs to explain it. Maybe it should be done in a way, in a kind way, maybe not done under the gun Erev Pesach. Maybe discuss it before Shavuos. So for next year. Unfortunately, I speak from experience that I've seen, that very often it becomes a battle because the husband, or if it's the wife who has the Chumrah, this can go either way, becomes very imposing, very judgmental, very condescending, like I'm holier than thou. I'll tell you a story that happened, not regarding Passover, but a similar story that just capture an idea. There was a couple they were dating. They were both not born in an observant home, but they became observant in their journeys, and they began dating. At this point, they were both committed to build a home, Shemer Torah Mitzvah, Shemer Shabbos, etc. They had agreed upon her covering her hair, other certain commitments that they made, and they agreed they would grow together. Getting closer to the wedding, the woman tells the chassan, the kala tells the chassan one day, I'm reconsidering whether I want to cover my hair. Shabbos I want to keep, I'm reconsidering. I didn't grow up with that, my mother didn't do it, I'm reconsidering. He panicked, he called me up and said to me, what should I do? I want to break the shidduch. She's like breaking her word. We had committed to this together. What should I do? He came in to see me, and I said to him, my opinion, you're asking my opinion? I would overlook it right now. I would overlook it. You're in a very fragile place. You haven't begun building your life yet. Every person has their ups and downs. If you really care about her, through love you'll get more than through with a stick. And he was very upset that I said that. He thought I would take his side. I said, let's put ourselves in her shoes. What do you think she's thinking? That you and God are on one side, that she has to cover her hair. And she's against God. So it's you and God, two against one. You really think she thinks that way? She doesn't think you're with God. She thinks you have your preference, just like you wanted to wear a blue dress, not a red dress. And if you impose it, it's about your will. It's not necessarily, she doesn't necessarily see you as a divine messenger. You have to demonstrate to your bittul and your humility. She may even be testing you, consciously or unconsciously, to see, you love me or do you love the Jewishness you want me to be? And just let it go. Well, to his credit, he listened, he let it go. And just for the record, she covers her hair today. In many ways, she's far more machmir than he is. And it just needed that type of relationship. That's the point. It's not a point where the shalom bayis is stronger than a chumrah. Why does the Torah taka say shalom bayis? Why did the Torah not say, whoever is more machmir, Pesach, that's more godly? Why is shalom bayis the foundation? Because shalom bayis means you're able to communicate to another human being and love them and not think about yourself. That's the foundation of all of Yiddishkeit. What did Hillel say to the potential convert? What's the Torah standing on one foot? What you dislike, don't do it to your another. Zui kolateira, ve'idach perusha, zil gemer. This is the entire Torah. The rest is commentary. Now go learn. The Alter Rebbe in chapter 32 in Tanya explains this. Why is it the foundation of the entire Torah? Remember, it doesn't say just the foundation of Torah ben Adam lechavere. You could say Avis Yisrael is the foundation of all laws between man and man. Laws of tzedakah, the laws of bikur chelim, the laws of visiting the sick, guests, and so on. Why is it the foundation of mitzvahs ben Adam lemokim, Shabbos, kashrus, davening, karbonos? Because the whole point of Avis Yisrael is Hagbaras Hatzura ala Chemer. The nafshe ikir v'gufei tofel. Love is not possible, true love, unless you make the nefesh ikir, the spirit dominates over the matter, over matter. And this is the whole point of Torah mitzvahs, that spirit should dominate over matter. That's why Avos Yisrael, loving another person, is the expression and the foundation of all of Yiddishkeit. Because Shabbos and Kashrus, what's Shabbos and Kashrus? That instead of the material world dominating, the spirit dominates. Every mitzvah of the 613 mitzvahs is about making and recognizing that the neshama is more powerful than the guf. That soul is more powerful than matter. The divine is more powerful than material selfish existence. So basically the essence of all Yiddishkeit is love. Shalom Bayis is the biggest expression of love between ish ve'ishtei, husband and wife. So that will bring chumras. If a chumrah overrides a love, and my chumrah makes me dislike another person, that's not godly. That's me. If you become a more sensitive person, more loving person, then that will bring chumras. That will bring people to be more committed. Avos Yisrael, in other words, will bring one closer to Yiddishkeit. Pasha Kisave, Tavshin Nun Aleph, is a fascinating farbrengen where the Rebbe speaks about Avos Yisrael in ways I believe he never spoke about before. So we know the famous Tanit Ve'Eliyahu where it says that the two things precede the entire world. Torah and Yisrael. And Eini Yedeya, Eliyahu says, Mehem Kodem, which comes first? We say Bereishis is B'shvil HaTorah, B'shvil Yisrael. Which one comes first? Torah or Yisrael? And then he says, but it says, Tzav B'nei Yisrael, Dabrel B'nei Yisrael. Since the Torah speaks to Israel, that tells you that Israel is more important than Torah, because Torah was given for Eden, not the other way around. So the Rebbe asked the question, so why does it say Eini Yedeya? So the Rebbe explains, because on a certain level, Torah and Israel go one. When a neshama is a neshama, and Torah, they both are the same thing. But if push comes to shove, pikuach nefesh deicha kol haTorah. Why? Why don't you say Torah is more important than a nefesh? Because the bottom line is neshamas Yisrael. And the Rebbe said this word, which means that when you save a life, ultimately that is sanctifying the Torah, as the Eir HaChaim says. And not only that, that will bring a person to be connected more to Torah. And lav dafka the other way around. If a person is more connected to Torah, lav dafka is going to bring them to the neshama. The neshama, for sure, if you preserve a soul, it'll bring you to Torah. You could preserve shalom bayis, it will bring you to chumras. It will bring to a sensitivity to two people who love each other. They demonstrate the love. Trust me, a wife or a husband that sees the other person really loves them and is ready to overlook some of their own even religious commitments because of that, that usually would cause them to be more softened and open to hear, let me hear what the person who loves me so much cares about. Now, obviously, it's again case by case, and each situation needs to be addressed, and it should sit down with somebody. If you can have a conversation about it, then obviously that's the greatest thing, and both parties can come to an understanding. But I was discussing the general approaches that love, shalom bayis, brings to Torah, not the other way around. Now, obviously, the Rebbe has many letters where he says that if you keep Torah mitzvahs, that itself will bring to shalom bayis. So how does that stem with what I'm saying? Obviously, I'm talking about a situation where there's a crisis, where there's tension. Obviously, a couple marries, a Yesedi HaTorah v'HaMitzvahs, a binyan ani ad on the foundation of Torah mitzvahs. Torah mitzvahs helps the bond of the relationship to be complete. That's a given. But let's say there's a tension in that itself. We're not talking here now breaking Torah mitzvahs. Even that, by the way, needs discussion. We were talking about chumras. What happens if someone allows the question where one spouse doesn't want to do a certain mitzvah? Not a chumrah, not a hidur, not some type of stringency, the actual mitzvah. What do you do then? Even there, shalom bayis reigns supreme, because the Eibishter says, erase my name to preserve shalom bayis. But there, one has to discuss it, and one has to look at the situation and understand it. But to create strife in family because of religious differences, that's not something that the Rebbe says. The Rebbe says religion and Torah mitzvahs will preserve the shalom bayis. But what happens if one of the people in the couple don't have that attitude? What are you supposed to do? So obviously, if you can convey with love the importance of the mitzvah, the importance of the chumrah, by all means. We were talking about a situation where you can't convey it, then there's a battle going on. And that's where you have to recognize the importance of shalom bayis. So what I'm broadening the topic is that the writer is writing very good points, and I agree with the idea that a chumrah should be looked at. It's not just to be dismissed. That was not my intention at all. I'm sorry if that came across to anyone that way. I wasn't dismissing chumras. On the contrary, a couple that takes on chumras in a joint way, beautiful. I was discussing when you start pitting one against the other and this becomes a battle, that's a problem. I remember once a fellow coming to speak to me, and he said to me, tell me, where in the sikhs does it say, you know the sikhs of the Rebbe, that a wife should listen to a husband? And he said to me, so I said, why do you need to know? He says, I have a friend whose wife doesn't want to listen to him. I immediately understood that the friend is him, like the story of the Rebbe Marash, where a guy came to the Rebbe Marash and said, Rebbe, I have a friend that did something terrible. He wants a tikkun. Can you tell me what to do? So the Rebbe Marash said, why did he have to expose himself to you? He could have come to me and said, I have a friend. So being that he didn't expose himself to this fellow, so I said to him, you know something? I don't remember such a sikha where the Rebbe says a wife should listen to a husband. It says the other way around, that a husband should honor a wife more than he honors his own self, his own body. He started yelling at me and screaming at me. It was very obvious. He was trying to use the Rebbe as a stick against his wife. That's not appropriate. That's what I was most concerned about. But however, if there is a communication, obviously all these things have to be taken into consideration, and why not have the best of both worlds? Shalom Bayis plus a beautiful kosher and freilich and Pesach. But not just a kosher and Pesach, also a freilich and Pesach. And not just a freilich, and also a kosher. And each case has to be weighed, and each couple has to deal with this issue. Different couples have different standards, but never allow your own chumrah just to become the wedge that creates tension. Often it's a sign that there's other tensions as well, in my experience. Okay, let's move on now. Well, before we move on, I just want to read recently a discovery that from a diary of Nissim Mendel, Dr. Nissim Mendel, who was a masker, was a secretary of the Frierdiker Rebbe, of the Rebbe, and wrote many of the letters. So he writes about that he was at a Pesach table meal in the 40s. This would be the Tavshins. And this is what he wrote in his diary. Present at the time of the meal, as was usually the case, were also younger light and Bochrim, who stood in the room during the meal and observed and listened. One of the guests eating at the table, this was with the Frierdiker Rebbe's apartment, was a non-Chabadnik who, not accustomed to the Chabad minhagim, dipped his matzah into the bowl of borscht. It must have been a bowl of borscht, made out of beets, the red borscht. The younger light and the Bochrim in the room were horrified at this infraction and started somewhat of a commotion, which eventually reached the attention of the Frierdiker Rebbe. Frierdiker Rebbe asked Rab Shmuel Levittin, of blessed memory, what the commotion was about. When Rab Shmuel found out and conveyed the details of this incident to the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe turned to the younger light and Bochrim, and with a serious expression said, "Es ist besser zu machen dem Matzah reit wie dem Ponim reit." It is preferable to make the matzah red than to make one's face red. You tell me, this is not just a chumrah, this is a chumrah, a serious chumrah, that we don't eat gibroks. Putting matzah in the borscht, okay, it can be argued, borscht is not water, but nevertheless, the Rebbe said, beser, to make the matzah red and basically overlook it and not make a fuss, than to embarrass somebody and make his face red. It speaks for itself. We see too much done in the name of religion, in the name of Yiddishkeit and Chumras, of condescension, of judgment, that to ignore that and just say Chumras are very much important to value, that's very nice, but you know something? A Yiddish Shemayim that has Chumras will do it in a sensitive way, will never do it in a way that hurts another person. And to make that a source of battle is a big question, whether it's a Chumrah apitera, or it's based on God, or based on your own gaiva, ego, pride, culture, programming, and so on. Something all of us can think about as we enter Pesach, something to think about, that the bottom line is, do it with love, do it because God wants to, not because it's your thing, your chumrah. Whereas like the person I once heard someone being at a Seder table, and there was a guest there, didn't have any inkling about gebroks and so on, and a piece of matzah fell into a cup of water. The host took the cup of water in front of this woman, in front of the other guests, and put it up on top of the refrigerator and said, "We can never use this." You can imagine that woman never returned to another Pesach table again. This is an example of obnoxiousness, example of novel b'reshus haTorah. It's b'reshus haTorah. It's all fine. It's chumrah, it's al pi shulchan aruch. You can find sources for it. People were meiser nefesh for these chumras. But what happened? You used it about you. It's about you. Take the cup, put it aside. Why'd you have to make this announcement? And there are unfortunately multiple cases like this, plenty to talk about in this MyLife, Chassidus Applied, about this topic. I think enough said, because I clearly wanted to qualify and say this is not in any way dismissing a chumrah, dismissing, God forbid, a person who's committed to Yiddishkeit, paid a price for it. That needs to be deeply respected, but it has to be put in context of the whole picture here. Let's move on to the next question. The question is a very sad one. I was pushing it off because I really was uncomfortable addressing it, even though we've addressed sensitive topics, but this one is acutely painful. It's about suicidal thoughts. Now, unfortunately, there's a phenomenon called suicide. Rachmana litzlan chas v'shalom, that no one should ever know of it. People who take their own lives, ma'avid atzmei ladas. People take their own lives. And it's much more prevalent than we may know, because it's one of the most shameful things for a family, one of the most disturbing things. And very often, this is the cause of young deaths, but it's not told that way because of the shame involved. I'm not here to judge that. But I want to address the issue of someone who has suicidal thoughts. So here's one question among many that came my way. I'm in so much pain, the questioner writes. I'm sitting in a coffee cafe, holding back from crying, lonely. I don't feel like I have friends. I'm not happy. I'm scared, afraid. This feeling inside of me is killing me. What I would like is to go away and start new, meet new people, make a life for myself. I can't take this any longer. I think I'm waiting for something big to happen. Something someone will come and just pick me up and show me that I'm amazing, that life is not over and I rock. Realizing that it's never going to happen unless I do it to myself, I just don't feel like I can. I'm in this hole which I dug. I'm so scared. Living by a friend's family house is not helping at all. I was thinking of putting myself in a homeless shelter. I don't want to be here living with this feeling thoughts. I'm not religious now, not praying, no faith, no trust, no kosher. Stole money. That's why I got fired. Now selling pills to have some money. My thoughts are around lawyer, court, money. I don't know who I became. I think I'm going to buy a one-way ticket, most likely to India. And give, I can't read the next line here, I'm not sure what it says here, and just go make a life, which everyone will tell me that's running away. Go stay and deal with your life. Well, I don't. I'm feeling that I want to kill myself. Well, this is one, as I said, among many letters. Some are even more painful to read than this one, of people who are suffering from despair to the point they just can't take it anymore and are considering suicide. This is not an easy topic to address, especially in this forum, because this usually should be addressed one-on-one with an individual. So anyone that has an issue like this, you must find someone to talk to that understands, that can speak to you. Those of us that know someone in this situation, never let them just feel despair. You have to be there for them. This is one of the most difficult experiences people deal with, and then later it's too late and we start wondering why we didn't care, why we didn't do something. So I do want to address this topic because it's a real topic. Here, if anywhere needs care, this is the one that needs most care. Because if someone comes to a point where they're ready to do something which is so counter to human nature, take your own life, you can imagine how dark things are, how bleak things are. Especially if there's been a suicide in the family before, God forbid, it makes it possible. For some of us, it's inconceivable. But when you know you had a grandmother or a grandfather or an uncle or somebody took their life, it becomes a viable option, tragically. So this is something not to be taken lightly. If you can't address it yourself, you must get professionals involved. And when a person speaks this way, it's not to be taken as a joke. You say, oh, he's just saying it to get attention. That may be the case. But someone can even speak that way, you know there's a serious situation. Now, of course, there are clinical situations that people suffer from depression or bipolar or other chemical disorders that may lead to such feelings. So that obviously has to be addressed a certain way, and medication and other things could help. But even if someone doesn't have a particular condition, this is something that needs to be addressed, especially by people who care and love. If you see someone that isolates themselves too much, like this person is writing, it's usually a sign that there's something that must be addressed. Now, I want to read a letter from the Rebbe, which I find to be quite interesting. A letter that the Rebbe wrote the 10th of Nisan, Tavshin Chaf Aleph, 5721. 10th of Nisan, a day before the Rebbe's birthday, which we just celebrated this past Friday. And here's the Rebbe's letter. Greeting and blessing. I received your letter in which you write about your efforts to implement my suggestion in connection with Purim. I trust that you have also been active in the matter of distributing of Shmura Matzah before Pesach, together with our friend Mr. With regard to the question of Gehenna is hell, and how it affects sinners in general and suicides in particular. You can well imagine that this is a subject about which I do not encourage discussion, especially in the case of a young man whose whole life is ahead of him and who has to utilize the years which God bestows upon him and utilize them with energy and joy and complete trust in God. So right there, I'm not reading on, I'm just explaining what the Rebbe writes here. The Rebbe did not encourage discussion because the whole attitude of discussing negative is not an approach al pi Torah, and definitely not al pi Chassidus, and not the Rebbe's approach to things. One should focus on the positive and the life ahead. Thus, the Rebbe continues now, this and similar morbid topics are not conducive to the proper attitude and activity which should fill one's life. But then the Rebbe continues, however, in order not to leave your question altogether unanswered, let me say briefly this. Besides the fact that one who takes his own life has no share in the world to come, and this is a result which few transgressions bring about, I'll address that soon a little more, there is the added consideration that there is no escape from God. And as it is written, Psalm 139:8, Im esek shemayim sham ata ve'etzia shol hincha. If I ascend up into heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, you are there. Therefore, and this is what the Rebbe says, one who takes his own life in the hope of avoiding suffering actually adds to his woes, in that in addition to having to go through all the things which he had hoped to escape, he has to suffer also the consequences of having to try to escape his duties and obligations, etc. However, the main point is, as mentioned above, this is not a topic to be delved in, but one should be totally immersed in Torah, which is called Torah's Chaim, the law of life, and the mitzvahs whereby Jews live, and to do one's utmost to spread the light and life of the Torah and mitzvahs in the environment at large. Hoping to hear good news from you and wishing you a kosher and happy Pesach with blessing. The Rebbe's signature. If you think about what the Rebbe is saying, is like, in other words, if you think you're going to escape, God forbid, through suicide, you can't escape God. You will have to deal with it again. You'll have to return and live that painful life. So there's no escape. I mean, if it weren't so serious, it would sound a little humorous that you cannot escape your suffering, you're going to have to come back. So what's the point of taking your life? But it is very serious. And it tells us also, this whole letter, the attitude one should take. If someone is contemplating suicide, it means they've given up completely on their soul, on God, and on their mission in this world. And that's why the punishment is no chelik le'elam haba. It's not tit for tat. It's not, oh, you take your life, that's why you can't get into the world to come. It's cause and effect. Once you cut yourself off from your soul and the soul's value, what will happen? How will the world to come help you? You have rejected it. You've rejected the importance of life, the sanctity of life, by taking it. I should qualify and add, because it may sound harsh, that in our day and age, the Rebbe did tell people who, God forbid, had suicide in their family, that it was not the person's fault, and therefore they can be buried in the regular way, and they will go into Elam Haba. Because there are certain circumstances, and it appears that the Rebbe feels that today's day and age, because of certain situations, many people who, God forbid, may take their lives, is due to forces that were not their control entirely. But that's another discussion, a much more sensitive one, and case by case, and I don't want to go into that without more documentation. But the bottom line is, it's not about being harsh. It's about telling us your life is valuable, your life is sacred. This is what we need to convey to people who contemplate, God forbid, taking a life. And the other side of it is that you can't escape it anyway. Your destiny is your destiny. You were sent to this earth for a mission. We have to figure out what that mission is. The mission may include also, yes, there are pains. We talked about a mission in life could include also difficulties and challenges. That's also part of the mission. I wanted to share a story that happened after my book, Toward a Meaningful Life, was published. I heard the story actually from Rabbi Danny Moskowitz, Olav Shalom, a shliach who's tragically prematurely passed away just over a month ago. And he told me the story in Chicago. He heard it from a young woman who would go visit her mother who was dying from a terminal illness in a hospital in Toronto. And this is the story. She gave her mother a copy of Torah Meaning for Life. Her mother was pretty weak at the point, so she couldn't always read it. But when her daughter would come and visit, her mother would say, read for me excerpts from the book of the Rebbe's teachings. She asked, what chapters do you want me to read? So she said, read to me from the chapter on, since I was an educator when I was a professional education, and the chapter on pain and suffering, because she wasn't just ill, she was also having terrible yisurim, terrible pains, terrible difficulty sleeping, real difficult pain and suffering in her life. So the two excerpts that she read, Rabbi Maskus shares with me that she shared with him, was one about the power of education. What is education? The Rebbe, one of the points the Rebbe makes, education isn't just imparting knowledge and facts. Education is shaping a life. So an educator has to realize that it's one of the greatest gifts to be able to help shape a life. Because education doesn't stop when school ends. It's a lifetime experience. To understand the value of education and that type of spiritual mission. That was one point. In the chapter on pain and suffering she read, the Rebbe said, this was taken from a talk from Simchas Torah Tovshin Lamed, which would be 1969, based on that talk, the Rebbe speaks about Shechionu, Vikimonu, Vigiyonu, Lizman Hazeh, the three terms, Shechionu, Vikimonu, Vigiyonu. The Rebbe says that if you calculate like a mathematician, like an actuary, like an accountant, like a bookkeeper, make two columns and say, here's the column of all the good things that have happened to me in my life. Here's the column of all the pains and suffering in my life. It may very possibly be that the left column will be longer than the right column. That the pain and suffering will outnumber the good things, the good times. So one can say, it's not worth living. Make a simple cheshbon. If you have 50 good things and you have 500 negative things, or whatever the number is, it's not worth it. From a mathematical point of view, it's a loss. That's if you look at life in a quantitative way, like a numbers game. However, if you see life as a mission from God, and you came down to this earth, and this earth includes everything, ups and downs, good times and bad times, and the whole picture is your mission, including the challenging times, then it's not a matter of quantity, it's a matter of quality. That you're alive, that you've reached this moment, that you've achieved something. So whatever happens in your life, even the negative has purpose. And you have to find the deeper purpose, the deeper strength that you get from it. After reading these two excerpts, the woman suddenly had this surge of energy. A day earlier, she had signed a DNR, do not resuscitate, because she already had given up on her life. And the doctors had already said she has terminal illness, so she decided, you know what? Why suffer any longer? She called the doctors back in, and she says, I want to rescind my signature. I want you to do everything possible to keep me alive. I will fight. These 2 points, that number one, though I have pain, that may be also part of the mission. And I was an educator. I didn't waste my life. I had shaped lives. Gave her a renewed surge of energy, recognizing her mission. And lo and behold, you know what Rabbi Maskus told me? She actually had remission. She went to remission. The illness went away. And she lived for a number of years afterwards. I'm not sure how many, but she lived for a number of years and with that new energy. So you never know that attitude to life. When you think of it in terms of a divine mission and the sanctity and the gift of life, there's, God forbid, God has taken too many young lives. We don't need to go and give a life away, God forbid. That's what suicide is. So appreciating the soul's mission, appreciating your value, your indispensable value is what we need to convey to anyone that has such thoughts. That's the real gist of the Rebbe's letter. And you cannot escape what you have to, your destiny. If you have to go through challenges, you're going to go through those challenges. What you do about it is up to you. The challenges are not up to you. Some of us are born in wealth, some of us are born in poverty, which is a greater challenge. It's a good argument. It's what you do with it. There are people born in poverty that become bitter and broken. There are people born in poverty that become great, beautiful, refined souls. There are people born in wealth with no excuse and become miserable human beings, selfish, greedy, unable, sense of entitlement. And there are people born in wealth that transcend that challenge and use their wealth for the good. It's what you do with it. The Rambam says, as I read in the letter last week, the Rambam says, everything in life is not up to you. What color eyes you have, how tall you'll be, where you're going to be born, so many factors. Your personality, your challenges. What you do with it is up to you. B'chir in the Sunnah. You're given the permission, you're given the free will to do what you wish with whatever situation you come in. You see people who've had the harshest experiences and have come out shining. People who have had relatively blessed lives and did not necessarily rise to the occasion. Let's move on. The final question for this episode, and that is honoring abusive parents. So let me read a few questions. How does one honor an abusive parent? Abusive in the sense of a temper, that angry and painful words are lashed out unexpectedly, caused by serious and regular matters. The anger will often be directed to current situations as well as revisiting the abused past mistakes. Another question. I'm a child of abusive parents. I've been going through very hard times and would love to get the help I desperately need, although that itself will be hard. But my parents, who basically don't let me do anything besides for going to school, obviously would never let me. I want a normal marriage, but I don't know what that means. I want to learn and work in it, but I'm not allowed to. No going out of the house, no cell phones, phone calls in the house are listened into. Books are risky. No internet access. This is a friend writing who keeps me posted. I feel like I'm a prisoner in my own home. Also, how responsible am I for my younger siblings? Even just listening and being there for them. Is it my achrayus to be their role model? I'm hardly managing myself, though I also have to take the time for them. And yet another question. I am 15. My siblings get abused physically and verbally. I am not meaning to exaggerate. I spoke with professionals and they say if I call child services or the like, my family will be broken up and the kids will be removed. So I'm not sure what to do. I have no respect or sympathy for the parents that tortured me and siblings. They claim to be frum Chassidic people and they are respected by others. What should I do? And one final question in this spirit, if you can call it spirit in this topic. My parents are horrible people. They are mean to each other, talk negatively about others, and often act irrationally towards myself, my brothers and sisters. We are all walking on eggshells all the time around them. They have provided me with a good life thus far, begashmius, materially, but I honestly don't have any respect for them. How can I fulfill the mitzvah of honoring my parents? And one more. I am a grown woman, happily married with beautiful children. I happen to grow up in an abusive home. My father was verbally and physically abusive. He acts like it didn't happen and has moved forward, but I have not forgotten. I don't like being around him. In fact, I hate him. But he's my dad. Do I honor him? How? With the time limitation, I'll begin the topic and continue in the future episode. So the first thing I want to address is the actual issue of abuse. Abusive parents is sad, tragic. Parents who are given as a pekadon, as a gift, to stewards to watch over their children, should go ahead and hurt defenseless, vulnerable, helpless children, one of the greatest crimes. I always feel that the greatest crime of a generation, of a society, is a society that does not protect children, because they are the only ones that are defenseless. And they are the future. And how children grow up in a home will shape their entire future, will shape their lives, will shape their children's lives, on and on, generation after generation. So to say it's a crime, abuse, is an understatement. It's worse than any crime possible. Because it's not just a one-time thing, it's forever. So I can't condemn, I don't have the words, enough words to condemn and say how absolutely abhorrent, disturbing, ungodly, almost obscene, criminal thing is for parents in any way to hurt their children. Your children are not yours. They don't belong to you. They belong to God. He gave them, entrusted them to you. What are you doing with them? Now, I know reaching to an abusive parent who may be hearing this, most parents who are abusive will never admit they're abusive, and they'll always blame somebody else. A spouse, their parents, their children. My children are horrible children. But you know, still words from the heart enter the heart. Maybe someone listening to this needs to hear it. It's absolutely unacceptable to hurt a child, period. A child has no one to protect them, and their most safest place is their home. They have no world except their home in their young formative years. And the damage done is one of the worst possible damages because it's coming from a person who's supposed to be loving. And even abusive parents also love their children, but they're messed up. So if there's any abuse going on, go get yourself some help. Find a professional. And if you can't control yourself, you know what we do with people who can't control themselves? They put them in straitjackets. Lock yourself up. Find a way to find someone to restrain you. It's unacceptable. Children can't protect themselves. They don't know what to do. They have nowhere to run because they don't see a world outside of their home. Walking outside the door of their home for young children is like walking off the earth. That's why they don't escape abuse. So that's number one. Absolutely, unequivocally, without any question, condemning it in every possible way. If you're familiar with a family or you see abuse in neighbors or others, to go report it. I wouldn't necessarily begin with that. That may be necessary too if it's persistent, but you must do something. You cannot just say, look the other way. It's life itself. I have my own theory, which I'm sure I'll address in future episodes, that the Rebbe established Tzivus Hashem in 1980, Tov Shem Mem. One of the reasons I thought that because there's a crisis with our children today. Our parents, educators are not protecting them enough. And the Rebbe felt that he wants to take them under his own wing and add whatever he can to reinforce their strength. It wasn't just about encouraging them in Torah mitzvahs. Obviously, that's the foundation of it all. But it was also the care for children. And there's no doubt in my mind that's one of the elements of caring for children in our time. I want to address what one should do in situations like some of these questioners ask. How can we honor such parents? It says, there's no qualification in the Ten Commandments, only healthy parents. It says honor all parents. Not only that, in order that you may live long. So I want to address that question. That will be addressed hopefully in the next episode, as well as what to do in any situation when you grow up, how to look at such parents, how to deal with them, and other factors around this topic. I know Mesayim B'Tev, it's not good to end with such a negative topic. So I want to talk about the positive as we go into Pesach. Obviously, Pesach is all about the children. Ki yishalcha vincha, v'yigadeto levanecha, v'yigadeto levincha, v'shenamtam levanecha, I should say. The whole Haggadah is around the children, about the love of children, the care of the children, encouraging them to ask, encouraging them to speak up, not to be silent. Apsachle, when it comes to any Yedei Elishel, the 4 different types of children, the wise one, the wicked one, they all are at the table, and the Rebbe adds the 5th one should also be at the table. So Pesach is a time for Pesach. Pesach from the words a mouth that speaks, which is the counterforce to Pera, Paroi, a negative mouth, which is an abusive mouth. So may this Pesach be an opportunity for all of us to speak with more love than ever to our children, to speak love into Seder table. This is what shapes lives. The love, the nurturing we provide. Just like a gardener waters and nurtures the garden, parents are gardeners. So ending here on a positive note of being healthy parents, healthier, bringing up beautiful children and celebrating Pesach with our families. And that we should merit to the time, right here, this month, that Mashiach should come. Children have much to teach their parents. As I said, we'll address this in future episodes. The next episode will not be next week because of Passover, the holiday. It will be in 2 weeks from this Sunday at 8 to 9 p.m. So this has been My Life, Chassidus Applied, episode 13. Thank you very much.